So, Chris Gore from Film Threat was reviewing this movie today, and he said, it won't be for everybody. And he's absolutely right. It's definitely not for me. Nope. Nope. No thanks. I am talking, of course, about the movie Stopmotion. I admit that this film intrigued me a bit, the idea of it. My son is really into stop motion. He's got some stop motion videos on his channel that he's worked very hard on. It's an extremely tedious art form, and it's really interesting. I do find it interesting. I would not have the patience to do that sort of thing, but it's fascinating to watch, right? So this movie takes that subject matter and creates this interesting premise. Yes, the premise was interesting to me. It's about this girl, I think her name is Ella, and her mother is a well-known stop motion animator, but her mother's hands, I guess arthritis or whatever, preventing her from working on it. And so Ella does the work for her mother. That's what you see at the beginning. That's it opens up, they're working together. Her mother's a bit overbearing. They don't seem to have the best relationship. Like, you get the sense that Ella is kind of cowed by her mom or put down or whatever. Like, there's not a healthy dynamic between them. Let's just say that much. And it becomes clear early on. You're kind of thrown right into the midst of this story, and you see these issues between mother and daughter. Something happens to the mother, and then the daughter decides to try to finish the film on her own, and then she gets sidetracked by this mysterious little girl that suddenly shows up, and the girl gives her ideas for her own movie to make. So she starts working on this movie, and then little by little, elements of this movie start to kind of overtake her. She descends into some level of madness or whatever, and that's the basic premise of the story. There's all this symbolism, obviously. I know there's symbolism in here, I can tell, but this film, it actually annoyed me, and I think I gave it maybe 1 star on Letterboxd, and that's being generous. Maybe 2. I can't remember. I gave it a low score because I did not like this movie. Oh gosh, I'm starting right off with the negatives. I do actually have some pros to this, believe it or not. So let me put the negatives on the back burner. Some of the pros, interesting premise already. I've already mentioned that. The stop motion in here, what's shown of it, like the story that she's working on, the characters are really odd looking. Like, they don't look, they're creepy, but the story that's being told, that's the movie I actually wanted to watch. That's what I would have liked to have seen, because throughout the movie with the live action characters, we are seeing this movie she's working on. It shows segments of that as it plays out. So I thought that was pretty interesting and well done. The stop motion is well done in here, especially when you know what goes into stop motion. And so I appreciated seeing some parts where she's working on, very, very slightly moving the object and then taking the picture, moving the object, taking the picture. And it's just crazy the amount of work that goes into something like that. The sound design, I have some pros, but also have some cons. So the pros, it was interesting that you'd see her working on things and you would hear the sounds of the armature, which is the skeleton of the creatures that they use in stop motion, and they manipulate that armature to make it move in certain ways. And so they were making the creaky noises of the armature, kind of like joints, creaking and moving as she's adjusting it. After a while, though, that started to get annoying. After a while, everything about this movie started to get super annoying. Part of that was because I never really felt connected with the character of Ella. I just couldn't feel close to her character. I was watching a review by Fish Jelly Film where they were talking about it, and one of them was mentioning that he just didn't feel like he knew Ella well enough. And to me, that was a big con because I grew to dislike her. I'm not sure that you're really supposed to like her too much. I don't know. I mean, she didn't start off as an unlikable character, but she just felt distant. So I felt no connection, and therefore I just just didn't give a crap what happened to her and disliked her. Even before things started to go seriously crazy, I was disliking her anyway, because the way she played her character was just not somebody with any, she didn't feel like she had any sense of depth to pull you into her as being an interesting person. She just seemed like this shell of a human being with no real personality. And so she was just blah to me. Also, the sound design, after a while, those noises of the armature moving would start to get under my skin. There was one part in the film where the characters were talking and the audio processing on it felt really weird, and I wrote it down as a con in that I thought there was actually something wrong with the audio processing. But then eventually you start to realize that this is a technique they're using to kind of show, I guess, I don't know, these mental whatever's going on with her. And that got aggravating too. I get that it's a technique. It didn't work for me. Then another thing that came into my mind as I was watching this was that it just felt, there was all this weird surreal stuff going on. It felt very abstract. Some of the scenes where she's like at a party and you think she's kind of like on drugs, and the way they're filming that is just really weird. And after a while it started to feel so ludicrous to me and so pretentious. It felt very pretentious. Like, oh, I'm some artsy schmartsy horror film, and so therefore you must take me seriously with all the... No, I'm like, this is stupid. I don't like it. And I was rolling my eyes. I was just, oh my gosh. Your mileage may vary with this one. If you like these sorts of really extreme, out there, ridiculous stories, you might really enjoy this. Technically, it's not terrible as far as the cinematography. Well, I wasn't crazy about the way the story was given to us, but the filmmakers knew what they were doing. And the actors are fine. There's nothing wrong with the acting in here, but I just didn't click with the story. I didn't click with the characters. I didn't like the way this story was told. And it felt quite disjointed, and maybe that was an intentional technique. It was not a super long movie. It was only about 90 minutes. And after about 30 minutes plus, I started to think to myself, wow, I'm not into this. I'm not feeling it. And I paced myself. I watched it in 30-minute blocks, and it felt so much longer than it really was. And part of that was because I was just growing to really dislike it. And I was thinking this might have actually worked better as a short, because it felt like there were these moments that were just dragged out and so unnecessary. And this story could have been told in 30 minutes or less. And I think maybe it would have been much more effective. I would have liked it more, because with short movies, you're given these characters, it's very concise, you're told this story in a super small amount of time, and because of that, sometimes the characters and the stories presented in such a way that it's just much more effective in getting its message across. And the length of this movie was a detriment. For me, it also felt like the more gory and nasty it got, it felt like it was just being done for the purposes of grossing you out. There's some pretty disturbing imagery in here, body horror type of imagery that's going on. And as it's showing certain moments, like there's a point in the movie where someone is messing with an injury on their body, and the sound of this skin being pushed and manipulated and kind of torn, and it's gooey and it's icky and it's bloody and it was a huge turnoff. And maybe part of that is just because there are some noises that just irritate the absolute you-know-what out of me. Maybe I have like misophonia or whatever the heck it's called, where just certain noises really get under your skin. Yeah, that's me. And this movie was not helping it. In fact, the more I heard of these nasty sounds, the more pissed off I got at this movie. Something I forgot to mention, I didn't even write this down in my notes, but I was remembering it now while I was listening to another YouTuber's review of this movie, was that the film didn't get started off on the right leg for me to begin with, because the opening shot is this very fast flickering sort of imagery of her, but it's like frames of stop motion, except it was very jittery, very fast, and obviously the noise that went along with that. And it seemed to go on way too long. And right away, I was annoyed. That little thing at the very beginning, it actually ticked me off. And I was just getting more and more irritated waiting for this part to stop. And it seemed to take forever. So yeah, in addition to the other things I've mentioned about this movie, there's that as well. It's just, there was just so much about it that aggravated me and I did not enjoy, despite some of the positives. Okay, back to the video. Yeah, unfortunately, it did not work for me. I am very grateful to IFC Films for letting me screen this movie. I put in a request for it and it was granted. I always feel kind of bad when I'm granted a screener and the fundamental experience is not positive, because I go into a movie and I want to enjoy what I'm sitting down to watch. I truly want to. Now, there are some movies that I go into and I know it's like, I'm not going to like this. That's kind of an exception. I thought that this movie would be better than it was, but unfortunately it didn't work for me. And so I can't give this a great review. That's not to say that I think you guys will hate it, because, you know, horror is one of those genres where it can be so divisive, because what works for one person absolutely does not work for another. And, you know, when you take someone like me, who I've seen so many horror movies, so many bad horror movies, and most horror to me is bad. And yet I still love the genre because I do like to be creeped out and I do like to just get into this tension and this suspense. I enjoy that, but not all horror is effective. And this one for me definitely was not. I think I mentioned on my Letterboxd review that horrible low-budget 80s movies are better than this movie, just because, I don't know, it tells a cohesive story. It tells a story. I mean, not that I couldn't follow this story. I knew what was happening, but some of the symbolism and stuff that was shown, it just felt like it, like I said, it falls into that pretentious area for me. That's not the type of storytelling that works for me. If I haven't made that clear enough by now, I'm pretty sure you guys know that this is not the type of story that I appreciate. And unfortunately, yeah, it was a negative viewing experience. I think I've gone over everything. There's no sense in continuing to talk and ramble on about how much I dislike this film. Check it out for yourself if you're interested. You guys, or some of you, may really enjoy it. I am seeing that audience scores for this are not so, like, they're coming down on IMDb. They're definitely in the rotten territory on Rotten Tomatoes with the audience score. The critic score's pretty doggone high. So I think this is going to be one of those times where official critics, now I am an official critic, not a Rotten Tomato critic yet, but this is going to be one of those times where there's a definite split between audience and critics. And I can see why. I can see why some critics really love it, but I can also see why most audience members are not jiving with it at all. And maybe if you guys watch it, you'll know what I mean. So if you do check it out, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I just don't think, definitely, Chris is right when he says this is not going to be for everyone. Yeah, this is not going to be universally appreciated, I don't think. And with good reason. I mean, okay. Well, I don't have anything else, so I am wrapping this one up, and we'll see you guys later. Adios.